Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. This is going to be a good one, I think. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. We're going to get into a couple plants, as always. The first will be our wild edible, and it's one that I've actually talked about in terms of its medicinal properties before, and it's one that you probably spent, if you have any yard or any land whatsoever, you probably fought briars most of your life. I have tons of briars in my yard of different types. Carrion flower is probably the biggest, but I've got bull briar, cat briar, common green briar. I mean, there are really tons of briars that grow around here. And the nice thing about them is they're both edible and medicinal. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. And then the herb is a really interesting one. It's one that's not used a lot anymore. In fact, it's considered a weed. One of those, it comes from my book, The Medicinal Weeds and Grasses of the American Southeast. These, of course, grow everywhere. Many of them, most of them, including this one, was brought to America by European immigrants to be used for medicine, but also it was used as a bittering agent for beer. A really interesting a plant I like. It's known as alehoff or elehoof, gill over the ground ivy. What else is it called? Creeping Charlie is one of my favorites. Great, those weird British names they give stuff. Haymaid's Runaway Robin. Now, how do you like that name? It's Glechoma heteroceae. Now, this is a really storied, well-written about herb that's been used by so many different cultures. So we'll talk about that one. And, it's one of those enemies of lawns. If you think your yard has to be just this perfect, pristine golf course type grass, then you probably don't like Creeping Charlie. Or what is it more common? Probably ground ivy. That would probably be the more common name here. I'm particularly fond of the name Creeping Charlie. That's what I prefer to call it. It was mainly planted as an edible plant. It was brought here by people to eat, right? The actual use of it as a beer bittering agent probably fell out of use, I would say at least by the introduction of hops, which was about 1100 AD. But could have continued a little bit longer in England. And that's why it's called alehoff, which is actually different than alehoof. So that's another one of its many names. But it's a really good, very good edible plant. And it's one you're going to want to learn to forage for and, of course, to use medicinally. I would say Creeping Charlie or ground ivy is really one of your most common lawn weeds, along with dandelion and such, and it is definitely one you should learn to eat. There's another one that's right on the tip of my tongue, henbit or dead nettle. That's another of their medicinal weeds. It's another one that our ancestors brought here mostly as a food plant. And I don't think I could estimate how much is spent in chemicals annually trying to eradicate these plants that our ancestors intended us to have as food and medicine. I mean, that's really like an insult to the inheritance they gave us, if you want to think about it that way. So let's start with the foraging plant. And as I said, this is briars. Okay, briars are probably the most overlooked of all wild food plants. For most people, they're just nuisance. They're just, they prick you. They've got thorns on them. Nobody likes them. Well, actually, the entire Smilax family, which is the true briar family, Smilax, is edible and quite tasty. Certain members of the briar family are also highly valued as herbal medicine, and you will be familiar with sarsaparilla. Sarsaparilla in early America was as well, probably even more sought after and valued than ginseng. It's an adaptogen, and it's the herb from which we make root beer, or we used to make root beer. Root beer would have been made with sarsaparilla and probably some sassafras. Maybe a few other barks, birch twigs would certainly have been in there. For our ancestors, you got to remember the water wasn't always clean. And so if they could brew something as a beer, the alcohol would preserve the water and keep them from getting sick. But with the root beers, and there were many of them, I mean, there were tons of root and bark beers, to which you just add a little sugar to some water, or the sap fresh from a tree is actually the easiest way to make it. I mean, maple, hickory, birch, etc. That sap is sugar water, essentially. And the yeast would colonize it, and it would turn the sugars to alcohol, and that would be a preserved beverage. So our ancestors would add barks and leaves and various herbs, not just for flavor, but for medicinal value. And sarsaparilla was really totally sought after. It was valued at least as highly as whiskey. You remember the old Western movies where the cowboy goes into the bar and he asks for a sarsaparilla. He's not asking for a soft drink. He's worn out from the trail. And he wants a sarsaparilla so, he can go upstairs and see Miss Kitty and the ladies, That's the truth of sarsaparilla in America and why it was once probably the most expensive imported herb into the United States, because it actually came from Mexico and I think just starting in Peru. I can't remember. Somewhere in South America was where it was first discovered, and then they found it growing like throughout the Yucatan, and there's just a huge trade. We were actually sending sassafras out to England especially, but to many European countries, because they believed it was a useful treatment for several venereal diseases, and meanwhile we were importing sarsaparilla. So whether your great-great-great-great-grandfather had a sarsaparilla a root beer that was purely sarsaparilla, or sarsaparilla plus sassafras, who knows? But actually, in that time, all of the Briar family was considered interchangeable for sarsaparilla. So you may have, and there was no labeling laws, no truth in labeling. So your root beer, unless you made it yourself, could have been made from greenbrier and capbrier and carrion flower and just about any member of the briar family, which is somewhat related to the Aurelia family. Now you may know Aurelia as like spikenard, devil's club, apopanax, which is, the Aurelias are somewhat related to the ginseng family. All of these have probably, I should say, have some adaptogenic properties. What is an adaptogen? An adaptogen is one that helps control stress responses in the body and restore strength after exhaustion or illness, or increase athletic performance, wound healing even. So these are very valuable herbs, and that's why ginseng has been so strongly sought after. Now, these days, ginseng is still just ridiculously expensive. I don't really use it. I do grow some, yeah, and use it every now and then. I've actually found, I did an interview a few months ago with a real expert on adaptogens, and he introduced me really to Gynostemma tea. I was familiar with it to some extent. I knew the name. I hadn't tried it. I've read about it, but I hadn't tried it yet. I actually find that to be more valuable than ginseng as an adaptogen, more valuable than the Aurelias. And it's so cheap. I mean, ginseng roots are literally worth a fortune. I mean, someone can make thousands of dollars on ginseng roots. You can get a couple of ounces of Gynostemma tea. It's the leaves of a plant, dried and ready to make tea for less than $10. I mean, that's going to be a couple months worth, at minimum. And I find it really good. But what's even better than a month's worth for less than $10? Well, you got free green briars throughout your yard, more than likely in your bushes, in your hedges, certainly in any patch of woods nearby. Free adaptogens are even better than cheap adaptogens. But we do have to remember the old root beers, contrary to popular opinion, and whereas we think of they're like soft drinks or something, they were actually strongly alcoholic. They could be as much as 20% alcohol. Nothing like the root beer you buy in a store. So let's look at a good root beer recipe. Let's take some dried roots of Smilax, the Briars, or Aurelia, or a little bit of sassafras, which the government now says will give you cancer, but I've said so many times, but if you just hear this show, I'll give the story one more time. The studies that show that sassafras and comfrey and probably a couple other herbs are dangerous were done by the government, where they were giving like the equivalent of 50 gallons of tea to a mouse. It would be like if you had a strongly concentrated swimming pool full of sassafras tea and tried to drink it all in one sitting every single day. Over the course of 10 years, yeah, you might get cancer. That amount of liquid, of course, would kill you long before then. There is no way to reasonably replicate those government studies. So they banned the sale of sassafras. They banned the sale of comfrey and a few other things, saying these plants can cause cancer. Well, they're far less carcinogenic than tobacco, and I haven't seen them ban the sale of tobacco. They regulate it, but they don't ban it. They're far less carcinogenic than many things, like grilled meat. I mean, it's an unfortunate fact of life that the tastiest meats that have a nice char on them are also very slightly carcinogenic. I don't worry about that. I have no history of cancer in my family. If you do, make your own decisions accordingly. Me, I use sassafras all the time. It grows wild in my yard. It grows wild in the woods all around me. It's actually one of the first herbs I ever learned to identify. I think my mother introduced me to it when I was like 3. And it's one of the most abundant. And frankly, if sassafras could actually give you cancer, just about everybody in Louisiana would have cancer, because gumbo filet is ground up leaves of sassafras and is commonly used in gumbo. It's a thickening agent that gives a little bay leaf type flavor. Sassafras and bay are in the same family. So I would absolutely use a sassafras root and a Smilax root and an Aurelia root in my root beer, but that's me. Water, sugar, or sweet tree sap in place of water. Lemon and yeast. That's all the ingredients. Bring the water to boil in a large pot. How much you use is going to depend on how much the quantity of the roots you have, how much space you have, what kind of fermentation vessel you might happen to have. I generally use 5-gallon carboys. But let's say you wanted to just make a gallon. Scale it up, scale it down. Totally up to you. Add your chopped up roots and boil in the water till the water is reduced by about half. It's going to take about an hour. Stir in 2 pounds of sugar per gallon. I think would be reasonable for home brewing using bread yeast. And that's all I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about a fancy beer brewing yeast that can handle a higher concentration of sugar or one that's actually, well, beer yeast is usually a lower concentration of sugar, but a wine yeast or a cider yeast. Um, there's actually one called turbo yeast that's used in distilling, and I think it'll get your alcohol up to 25%, and it can handle some serious sugar. But let's just say you just got old, I don't know, just what Red Star bread yeast. Just you're going to find it at any grocery store. I think 2 pounds of sugar per gallon of water would be about right. Um, yeah, scale it up or down as you please. Again, and as I've said, you can just use the sap from a tree you would tap this time of year in the spring. When the sap's rising, it's just basically water and sugar, and a lot of really good flavor. So, um, I would tap a tree, but maybe you live where you don't, or you just have water and sugar. Just any way you look at it, make sure the water has boiled enough to get all the chlorine out of it if you're using medicinal water. Make sure, of course, the water's clean. But other than that, you're just making a strong decoction or tea of the roots, and you're adding some sugar, a little lemon. Um, I would absolutely add a handful of birch twigs and green leaves. It's going to give you a really nice flavor. It has a wintergreen flavor, and it actually makes it more medicinal, more antiviral, aspirin type qualities of salicins in birch. So I would, this is one time I would definitely use some birch twigs and green leaves if I had them. And all of these ingredients are considered traditional spring tonic. So this is really when you would want to be using this. I mean, that's why I included it in my spring foraging cookbook, because the green briars are coming in green, and these are all spring tonic roots. So cover it. I usually let it sit overnight. Strain out all the solids. You just want it to cool down so it doesn't kill your yeast. Add your yeast. Just literally open a package of yeast and drop it in there. It's called pitching the yeast. The yeast will immediately begin to eat the sugars, colonize the entire vat, pot, whatever, and begin multiplying. It's going to get frothy on top. You can let it ferment just 24 hours, bottle it, and refrigerate it, and that's going to be that kind of sweet root beer with essentially no alcohol. I mean, like 1-2%. That's going to be the closest you can get to store-bought root beer. Otherwise, you can let it ferment as long as you want, till it's absolutely dry and not sweet at all if you want to. Me, I'd probably aim for about 5%, but I have made some that was higher than 20%, and let me tell you, it kicks like a mule. Yeah, it's dangerous stuff. So I would, for the average person, and really just so you don't end up with a horrible headache, probably don't let it ferment entirely dry, or cut back on the sugar you use, if you want a drier taste. So the green parts of the plant are the edible bits, the shoots and leaves. The new tender leaves and shoots are best. So this time of year, when things are just starting to green up, that's the time to gather your green briars. You can snack on them raw while hiking. You can add them to a salad. The leaves cooked are really like spinach. They don't have a strong flavor at all. They're mild, a mild green vegetable. You could use them anyway. You could do them in a stir fry. You could do them in a frittata. They pair particularly well with sweet corn. So if you pick your leaves, they're going to keep regenerating leaves. You can get your tender green briar leaves later into the season, or you could actually blanch some and stick them back in the freezer and have them with sweet corn when the corn comes in season, or you could have frozen blanched corn that you use with your green briars when they come in season. Basically, I would say if a recipe calls for bean sprouts, toss in some briar shoots. You will really like that. You'll be glad you did. Otherwise, cook the shoots the same as you would asparagus. Just a little salt, a little water, a little oil. Bring it up to a simmer, uncover it, let the water cook off, and let it. It's the steam saute method. I talk about this over and over in my book. This is my favorite way to cook most vegetables. It gets to kind of boil and steam in the water. When the water's gone, it begins to saute in the oil. It's a one pan or pot cooking method that does two things and doesn't overcook your vegetables. They don't get mushy, but cooks them through so they don't, they're not too tough between your teeth, because, that is probably the Biggest thing with wild foods, wild vegetables, is they can get too tough if they're a little too mature. They haven't been bred for tenderness and sweetness in the garden. But yeah, steam saute method, I use that for a lot of stuff. And yeah, that's mentioned like, I don't even know, 25 times in this book. And it is literally that simple of just, put your vegetables cut, trimmed, prepared, ready to go in a pan, salt to taste, anything else you want to add really to taste. A little water, a little olive oil, sit it on a hot burner as hot as you can. Let it kind of simmer until all the water steams off, uncovered, obviously, and then it will begin to kind of saute or fry or whatever in the olive oil that's left in the pan. Squirt lemon juice and you're good to go with just about anything. A little black pepper, whatever. Flowers are really good at the bud stage. That's one you would look for on just about everything but the carrion flower. Okay, now at the bud stage, the carrion flower may be okay. As I said, this is probably the biggest briar that grows in my yard. This thing is massive. Carrion flowers are called carrion flowers because when the flowers open and bloom, they smell like rotting meat. That attracts flies that fertilize the flowers, and that's the reproductive strategy of that plant. At the bud stage, carrion flowers are actually really good, but once they open, you're not going to want to go anywhere near that plant. I mean, really, it stinks like rotting meat. So unless that's your thing, if that's something you crave, I don't, Medicinally, I like the carrion flower a lot because it's very similar to sarsaparilla, but has no thorns. I love carrion flower for basket making. It is such a wonderful briar to use for weaving baskets because there are no thorns. Now, you can weave baskets out of most any briar. You take your knife and cut the thorns off, just kind of scrape it across. But you don't have to do that with carrion flower, and it's really nice. So that's why, even though it is a very stinky plant, it's pretty actually. It's a very pretty plant, and it's a very useful plant. So I don't try to eradicate it. It's not a weed to me. It's a useful, edible, medicinal, textile? I don't know. A plant for weaving. Anyway, now let's talk about Glechoma heteracea. Creeping Charlie is my favorite. You might know as ground ivy. That's probably more common in America, is to call it ground ivy. Pretty little plant, often maligned as a weed. It's a medicinal herb with a long history of use. Ancient Greeks used it a lot. Dioscorides called it, I'm not even going to try to pronounce what Dioscorides called it, but he describes it and says that it particularly likes disturbed soil, what he would call tilled places. That's true. But a decoction of the leaves, taken in 3 cups full of water for 50 days, is good for sciatica. That's a long time to get some relief from sciatica. But I suffer from sciatica due to an old back injury. Definitely worth trying. I've never tried it for that purpose, actually, but I will. Maybe. As a decoction, take it as a drink for 6 or 7 days. It cleans away jaundice. It's a very good herb for the liver, actually. It's called, I'm not going to get into all the old Roman and Egyptian words for it, but, So it was useful in classical Greek medicine. In England, 1400s, no, this would be 1500s, Culpeper said it was an herb of Venus. Now, what he means by that is it's a good woman's herb, and therefore cures the diseases she causes by sympathy, and those of Mars by antipathy. No idea what that means. He was a weird guy. He liked to combine astrology with herbal medicine, and I very seldom have any idea what he's talking about when it comes for that, that aspect. But medicinally, he was a licensed apothecist, and he said it would be available all year except when it's extremely frosty. That's true. You're not going to find it in the winter, but pretty much the rest of the year. It is quick, sharp, and bitter in taste, and is thereby found to be hot and dry. Another thing that he likes is the humors that they used to use in ancient Greek medicine. It's an energetic system of understanding herbs. Some people still enjoy it. I find it somewhat useful. I actually probably judge my herbs more by taste than anything else. That's just me. He said, "Is a singular herb for all inward wounds." And what he means is that it would stop internal bleeding. Good for ulcerated lungs and other parts, either by itself or boiled with other like herbs, and being drank. In a short time it easeth all griping pains, windy and choleric humours in the stomach, spleen, or belly. It helps the yellow jaundice by opening in the stoppings of the gall and liver, and is good for melancholy and the stoppings of the spleen. It expelleth venom or poison, and also the plague. It provokes urine and women's courses. That means it can bring on menses. The decoction of it in wine drank together for some time procures ease to them that are troubled with sciatica, or as he called it, hip gout, gout in the hip. Also good for gout in the hands, knees, and feet. Now that's more arthritis, so he's talking sciatica and arthritis more than anything else. If you put some of the decoction with some honey and a little burnt alum, it is excellently good to gargle for any sore mouth or throat, and to wash the sores and ulcers in the privy parts of man or woman, that means the genitals. It speedily helpeth green wounds, being bruised and bound thereto. It's a good poultice, in other words, for wounds. The juice of it boiled with honey and verdigris. I'm not actually sure what verdigris is. But anyway, it doth wonderfully cleanse fistulas, ulcers, and stayeth the spreading of eating cancers of the skin and ulcerous wounds. So, wow. It helpeth the itch, the scab, wheals, and other breaking out of any part of the body. That's going to be more like eczema and psoriasis, really. The juice of the celandine, field daisies, and ground ivy, clarified, and a little sugar dissolved therein, and dropped into the eyes as a sovereign remedy for all pains, redness, and watering of them, as also for the pin and web, not sure what that is, but skins and films growing over the sight. So he was really probably talking about like cataracts, actually. It helpeth beasts as well as men. The juice dropped into the ears doth wonderfully help the nose, and the juice dropped into the ears doth wonderfully help the noise and singing of them. In other words, he said it was good for ringing of the ears, tinnitus. And helpeth the hearing which is decayed. It is good to ton up with new drink. Ton, it actually refers, we're going back to beer again. That's using the herb, essentially steeping it in beer and using it in place of hops. For it would clarify it in a night that will be the fitter to be drank the next morning. I don't know. He probably just, maybe saying help prevent hangovers. I have no idea. Anyway, you could see why our ancestors brought ground ivy or creeping Charlie to America. They thought it was somewhat of not only an edible weed, or they may have even grown it in their gardens, but it is so useful medicinally. I mean, it's a veritable panacea. By the 1930s, it wasn't used anywhere near as much in England, but Miss Grieve tells us that it was one of the commonest plants, flourishing upon sunny hedge banks, and waste grounds. People had planted it all over. I mean, it was such a useful herb. She describes it again, and as I always say, just, look it up online. We have the internet now. We can pull up pictures. We don't need, I don't need to spend 15 minutes reading a botanical description of a plant to you. But for medicinal use, she's used the whole herb, gathered in early May, so again, we're getting to the right time of year, when most of the flowers are still quite fresh. She said it was diuretic, astringent, tonic, and gently stimulant, so helps remove excess fluid, tones and tightens tissue. Tonic is probably tonic to the stomach, more like helping digestive issues, and gently stimulant. Useful in kidney diseases and indigestion. She said from early days, ground ivy has been endowed with singular curative properties and is one of the most popular remedies for coughs and nervous headaches. It has even been extolled before all other vegetable medicines for the cure of consumption. That's tuberculosis. So, she liked to make a tea out of it. It was actually used as a cold tea, like we might have iced tea. And she said, although it has long been discarded from the Materia Medica as an official plant, But it was particularly good as a medicine for pulmonary complaints, where a tonic for the kidneys is required, and is particularly suitable to all kidney complaints. So you can see, even in the 1930s, it has fallen out of popularity, but was still considered to be remarkably useful. She goes on to say that it's diaphoretic, means it can help break a fever. We said diuretic, astringent, but snuffed up the nose. The juice, actually, just like inhaled up the nose, was considered a curative for headaches when all other remedies have failed, and a snuff made from the dried leaves of ground ivy will render relief against a dull, congestive headache of the passive kind. Again, that would be sniffed up the nose, which we don't do much anymore. It's very irritating for one thing. She mentions that Gerard had said back in the 1400s that it was good for ringing of the ears. And she quotes Galen, she quotes all kinds of old authors. In the Irish tradition, John Kehoe said it's a great laxative and also a cure for deafness, coughs, or any disorders of the lungs. It provokes urine, cleanses the uterus, and if steeped in brandy is a great service against the colic. Sophie Hoderick's-Nab tells us of the Polish tradition, the leaves cleanse the blood and subsequently are used in the form of fresh juice in the springtime. They were put through a meat grinder and then squeezed with a cloth to obtain the fresh juice. In the barnyard, it was used as a remedy for horses having trouble urinating. She also included a chicken soup recipe from 1850 that contained ground ivy, parsley roots, and barley that was said to be good for the chest and for coughs. Now turning to America, King's Medical Dispensatory, this is what a pharmacist would use, specifically an eclectic of the eclectic tradition, or school I should say. 1898 says ground ivy is stimulant, tonic, and pectoral, meaning good for the chest, and has been recommended in diseases of the lungs, kidneys, asthma, jaundice, hypochondria, which is actually a swelling of the pleroma, the area around the lungs. And let's see, an infusion of these is highly recommended in lead colic. It said it was specifically stated that painters who use it often are never troubled with that affliction. That's lead poisoning. And, all paints were pretty much lead-based. You could have a milk-based paint. But all paints were not lead-based. If you've never explored old paints, you might be surprised to find that soured milk with a little pigment made an excellent paint. Just a long tradition going way back. It's specifically popular in Scandinavia and Germany. But yeah, very interesting. But in the around 1900, most paints were lead-based, and apparently the ground ivy or creeping Charlie or what's the official name? Glaucoma heteroraceae, I believe, would help somehow against lead poisoning. Now, I don't know how. Cilantro, for instance, is very good at removing lead from the body, believe it or not. Maybe ground ivy has a similar property of removing heavy metals from the body. It's better not to get exposed in the first place, though. And they again said the fresh juice snuffed up the nose was said to cure a headache. The Cherokee used the herb, and they said it was a tea given to babies for hives. The leaves steeped in hot water drank from measles. And let's get up to modern use. Plant for Future says ground ivy is a safe and effective herb that is used to treat many problems involving mucous membranes of the ear, nose, throat, and digestive system. A well-tolerated treatment, it can be given to children to clear lingering catarrh, that's congestion, and to treat chronic conditions such as glue ear and sinusitis. Well, that's interesting. I think glue ear is like a running ear that just keeps pussing. I knew somebody had a condition. It's kind of nasty, but doctors aren't really good at treating it, so that would actually be really worth looking into. Throat and chest problems, especially those due to excessive catarrh or congestion again, also benefit from this remedy. The leaves and flowering stems are anodyne, antiphlogistic, appetizer, stimulating appetite, I guess. Astringent, digestive, diuretic, febrifuge, pectoral, gently stimulant, tonic, and vermifuge. we've covered most of those words before. Vermifuge means helps get rid of parasites. They just say again, harvest in May while the flowers are still fresh. Leaves are used for the treatment of hypersensitivity in children, are useful for kidney diseases and indigestion. They don't specify what kind of hypersensitivity they mean, actually. It could be probably skin rashes, like dermatitis, maybe. Applied externally, the expressed juice speeds the healing of bruises and black eyes. Used with caution, it says. Known hazards. A report in medicinal uses says the plant should be used with caution, but no reason is given, and another report says the plant might be toxic to horses. Let's see if Cloverleaf Farm has anything. Oh, well, yeah. Actually, they give this caution. Cloverleaf Farm gives us more information about this. They said death has occurred in animals, especially horses, who have ingested large quantities of the plant. Native to Europe and Western Asia. They tell it was brought here. In England, the plant known as ale hoof was used to flavor and clarify ale, the traditional drink of Anglo-Saxons. During medieval times, it was recommended for fever and was a popular treatment for chronic coughs. Key actions, they just cover everything. Yeah, we just covered, so we're good. I think we're wrapping this one up. In fact, they seem to be quoting directly from Plants for a Future without telling people that, without what's the word for it? But it doesn't matter. Whenever I quote from someone, I always like to say, give them attribution. That's the word. I find that to be the best policy. But they say, they talk about its homeopathic uses, in which it's used for diarrhea and hemorrhoids. And in Chinese medicine, used to treat carbuncles, erysipelas, so those are skin issues, lower abdominal pain, scabies, scrofula, irregular menstruation, coughs, dysentery, and jaundice. Peterson Field Guide to Medicinal Plants says traditionally leaf tea has been used for lung ailments, asthma, jaundice, kidney ailments, as a blood purifier. Externally, it has been used as a folk remedy for cancer, backaches, bruises, and piles, which are hemorrhoids. So it says astringent property that you're looking at there. And lastly, Botany in a Day says the herb has been used for respiratory ailments, including bronchitis, pneumonia, and coughs. So that wraps up. Let's see, I'll give you the Latin name one more time. Glechoma hederaceae, Glechoma Hederacea, as I've said, more commonly known as creeping Charlie or ground ivy, and several other, I find them to be delightful names. But when you think about how useful this plant is medicinally and as a food, and that it was, again, it was put here purposefully for that purpose. And what do? We try to kill it. So we have grass that looks like a golf course. For what reason? I mean, really, how dumb is that? So that's from my book, Medicinal Weeds and Grasses of the American Southeast. The Green Briar was from my Spring Foraging Cookbook. Please check out my books and buy them if you like. And you'll have a great week. I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.